Part 1. The Prophecy's Shadow King's Nightmare. Alpha King Rhys Blackwood woke screaming for the third night in a row, his sheets soaked with sweat, his wolf clawing at the inside of his mind with desperate urgency. The same dream. Always the same dream. He stood in the throne room, watching his kingdom burn. Not with fire, but with shadow. Living darkness that consumed everything it touched, turning wolves to stone, reducing buildings to ash, spreading like a plague across his territories. And at the center of the destruction stood a wolf he'd never seen before, massive, black as midnight, with eyes the color of frozen lakes. Silent, absolute, unstoppable. And then the voice, ancient and cold, whispering words that made his blood freeze. The shadow comes cloaked in the form of love. The king, who claims her, will doom his people. The mate bond will be the key that unlocks the darkness. Only rejection before the seal breaks can prevent the prophecy's fulfillment. Rhys had been having this nightmare since his coronation 3 years ago. He consulted every seer, every shaman, every ancient text in the royal archives. The prophecy was real, recorded in a dozen different forms across centuries of pack history. And it was specific. The Unbreakable Shadow Wolf would manifest when the Alpha King found his true mate. The mate bond would trigger a transformation so powerful, so destructive, that it would tear the kingdom apart. The only way to prevent it was to reject the mate before her true nature awakened. Reject her with such cruelty, such absolute finality, that the bond shattered completely before the seal on her power could break. For 3 years, Rhys had avoided the mate gathering ceremonies, the diplomatic meetings with other packs, any situation where he might encounter his fated Luna. He'd locked his heart in ice, sworn never to claim a mate, resigned himself to ruling alone. But the moon goddess had other plans, because tonight was the autumn equinox festival, and attendance was mandatory for all unmated wolves in the kingdom, including the beta's quiet, unremarkable daughter who just turned 23, including Kaelen Ashford, whose scent would change everything. The Festival of Fate. The great hall blazed with light and celebration. Hundreds of wolves from every pack in the northern territories had gathered for the Equinox Festival, a night of feasting, dancing, and the possibility of finding one's fated mate. Rhys stood on the raised platform, watching the festivities with carefully maintained disinterest. His beta, Marcus, stood beside him, making observations about potential political alliances and suitable matches from various packs. The Silvermane Alpha's daughter is here, Marcus noted. Strong bloodline, excellent diplomatic connections. She'd make a suitable queen, even without a mate bond. I've told you, Marcus, I'm not taking a chosen mate. The risk is too great. Rhys's voice was cold, final. The pack needs a Luna. The kingdom needs heirs. You can't rule alone forever just because of some ancient prophecy that might not even... It's real. Rhys's eyes flashed with alpha authority. I've seen it. Every night. The Shadow Wolf destroying everything I've sworn to protect. I won't risk my people for personal happiness. Marcus fell silent, knowing better than to argue with his king when he used that tone. The celebration continued below, wolves laughing, dancing, celebrating life and possibility. And then, at exactly midnight, the doors at the far end of the hall opened. She walked in like an afterthought, unnoticed by most, expected by none. Kaelen Ashford was not memorable, not in a way that drew attention or inspired second glances. She was of average height, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing a simple dress that was appropriate but unremarkable. Her father was Beta Ashford, a respected but not particularly influential member of the council. Her mother had died in childbirth. She'd been raised quietly, educated competently, and generally existed on the periphery of pack society. She was, by all accounts, perfectly ordinary, except for her scent. The moment she entered the hall, Rhys felt his entire world tilt on its axis. Mate! The word exploded through his consciousness with the force of a physical blow. His wolf, which had been restrained and controlled for 3 years, surged forward with desperate, overwhelming certainty. The mate bond snapped into place like a chain made of starlight, connecting his soul to hers with absolute, undeniable truth. She was his Luna, his fated mate, the one the moon goddess had chosen for him, and she was going to destroy everything. Rhys watched in horror as Kaelen froze mid-step, her hand flying to her chest, her eyes widening with shock and wonder as she felt the bond snap into place on her end. Her gaze swept the room, searching, and when it landed on him, when their eyes met across the crowded hall, he saw recognition, hope, joy, and something that looked like relief. She'd been alone too, waiting, wondering if she'd ever find her mate. And now she had. Now she was looking at him with eyes that held everything he'd ever wanted and everything he could never allow himself to have. Around them, the celebration had gone silent. Everyone had noticed. The mate bond between an alpha king and his Luna was impossible to hide. It radiated power, made the air thick with magic, caused every wolf in the vicinity to instinctively bow their heads in respect. Kaelen began to move toward him, drawn by the bond, her expression transforming from shock to tentative happiness. She was nervous, he could see, uncertain but hopeful. She didn't know what was coming, didn't understand that the moment she reached him, the moment they touched, the prophecy would begin its terrible countdown. Rhys had seconds to make a choice. Accept her, claim her, watch his kingdom fall, or do the one thing that might save them all. He chose survival. Part 2. The public rejection, the cruelty. Kaelen Ashford had dreamed of this moment her entire life. Finding her mate, feeling the bond snap into place with undeniable certainty, looking across a crowded room and seeing recognition in someone else's eyes. You're mine, I'm yours. We were meant to find each other. She'd expected nervousness, awkwardness, the slow building connection as they learned each other. What she hadn't expected was for her mate to be the Alpha King himself, the most powerful wolf in the entire Northern Territories, looking at her with an expression that made her blood run cold. Horror. Absolute, undisguised horror. She stopped walking halfway across the hall, suddenly uncertain. Around her, the celebration had gone completely silent. Every wolf was watching, sensing the historic significance of this moment. The Alpha King had found his Luna. The kingdom would finally have a queen. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, her voice shaking slightly. I felt it. The bond. You're my... No. The word cut through the silence like a blade. Rhys's voice carried alpha command that made every wolf in the room instinctively submit. I am not your anything, and you are most certainly not my Luna. Kaelen felt something crack inside her chest. But the bond. You feel it too, I know you do. You're my fated mate. I feel nothing, Rhys said, his voice cold enough to frost the air. What you're experiencing is a false bond, triggered by proximity and wishful thinking. It happens sometimes with weaker wolves who desperately want to be chosen. The insult landed like a physical blow. Around them, gasps rippled through the crowd. Calling a mate bond false was one of the cruelest things an alpha could say. It dismissed not just a bond, but the person's worth, their dignity, their very existence. That's not true, Kaelen said, her voice gaining strength even as tears began to form. "I can feel it. This is real. You're lying. I'm your king, and you will not question me." Rhys descended from the platform, moving toward her with predatory grace. "I know what you are, Kaelen Ashford. I know what's sleeping inside you, waiting to wake. And I would rather die alone than claim a mate who will bring ruin to my kingdom." He was close now, close enough that she could smell him. Pine and winter and alpha power so overwhelming it made her knees weak. Close enough that the mate bond screamed for her to touch him, to close the distance, to complete the connection. "Please," she whispered, tears now streaming down her face. "Don't do this. Whatever you think I am, whatever you're afraid of, we can face it together. That's what mates do." For just a moment, something flickered in Rhys's golden eyes. Something that looked like pain, like regret, like the same desperate longing she felt. But then it was gone, replaced by cold certainty. "I, Rhys Blackwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, reject you, Kaelen Ashford, as my mate and Luna." The formal words of rejection echoed through the silent hall. "I sever the bond between us. I renounce any claim you might have had on my heart, my crown, or my kingdom. You are nothing to me. You will never be anything to me. And I command you to leave my presence and never return." The bond didn't just break. It shattered. Kaelen felt it like a physical tearing, like someone had reached into her chest and ripped out her heart while it was still beating. The pain was beyond description, not just emotional, but physical, spiritual, fundamental. The mate bond was sacred, woven into the very essence of what werewolves were. Breaking it was like breaking reality itself. She collapsed to her knees, unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to do anything but experience wave after wave of agony that threatened to tear her consciousness apart. "Get her out of my sight," Rhys commanded, his voice steady, showing no sign of the pain he must have been feeling. The rejection hurt both parties, but he'd been prepared, had steeled himself, had locked his own suffering behind walls of ice and duty. "Beta Ashford, take your daughter and leave. She is banished from the capital, effective immediately. If she returns, she'll be executed for defying a direct royal command." Hands grabbed Kaelen, her father, she dimly realized, pulling her to her feet, supporting her weight as her legs refused to work. Around them, the crowd parted in shocked silence. No one spoke. No one moved to help. They were all too afraid of their king's wrath, too stunned by what they'd witnessed. The Alpha King had found and rejected his fated mate in the space of 5 minutes. And Kaelen Ashford's life would never be the same. The aftermath. Beta Ashford carried his daughter from the hall, her body racked with sobs that sounded more animal than human. He'd served Rhys faithfully for years, trusted him, believed in his leadership. But watching his king deliberately shatter his own daughter's heart, for reasons Ashford didn't understand, made him question everything. "I'm taking her to the border territories," he said to Marcus, who'd followed them out. "She can't stay here. The pain of being near him without the bond." "I know." Marcus looked genuinely sympathetic. The king, he had his reasons. The prophecy. "I don't care about prophecies." Ashford's voice cracked. "That's my daughter, my only child. And she just had her soul torn in half because your king decided she wasn't worthy. It's not about worth." Marcus touched Ashford's shoulder, his expression grave. "But I can't explain. Just trust that Rhys is trying to save the kingdom, even if it costs him everything." Ashford pulled away, disgusted. If this is what saving the kingdom looks like, then maybe the kingdom doesn't deserve to be saved. He took Kaelen to a small cottage on the outskirts of the territory, as far from the capital as he could get, without leaving Pack lands entirely. She didn't speak for 3 days, barely moved, barely ate. The bond shattering had left her hollow, broken, a shell of the person she'd been. On the 4th day, she finally spoke. "I need to leave." Her voice was hoarse, damaged. "I need to go somewhere he'll never find me, never see me, never have to be reminded that I exist." "Kaelen, you're not well enough to travel. I'm dying here, Father." She looked at him with eyes that had aged a decade in 4 days. "Every breath hurts. Every heartbeat reminds me of what I've lost. If I stay, the pain will kill me. At least if I leave, if I go somewhere far away, I have a chance at—" She didn't finish. Didn't say survival or healing, because neither seemed possible. But she had to try. Ashford wanted to argue, wanted to keep her close, wanted to protect her the way he'd failed to protect her from the king's cruelty. But he could see the truth in her eyes. Staying would kill her, slowly and painfully. "The borderlands," he said finally. "The cursed forests that mark the edge of our territory. They're dangerous, but they're empty. No pack claims them. You could hide there, at least for a while." "Perfect." Kaelen stood on shaky legs. "Help me pack. I leave tonight." As father and daughter prepared for her exile, neither of them noticed the change beginning in her scent. The muted, unremarkable quality that had defined Kaelen Ashford her entire life was starting to shift, to darken, to carry undertones of something ancient and cold. The rejection hadn't killed her. It had unlocked something far worse. Part 3. The exile and near death to cursed borderlands. The forests at the edge of the northern territories were called cursed for good reason. Trees grew at unnatural angles, their bark black and rough, their branches forming patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The ground was covered in thick fog that never lifted, that moved like it was alive, that carried whispers in languages no living wolf understood. Animals avoided the area entirely. No prey to hunt, no bird singing, just absolute, oppressive silence. It was the perfect place for someone who wanted to disappear. Kaelen built a rough shelter from fallen branches and spent her days doing nothing. Existing was exhausting enough without trying to accomplish anything more complex. The pain of the rejection hadn't faded. If anything, it had intensified, spreading through her entire body like poison. She should have died. Most wolves who experienced mate bond rejection did die, their hearts simply giving out under the strain. But Kaelen survived, day after agonizing day, though she wasn't sure if that was mercy or cruelty. On the 7th day, she heard the voice for the first time. "You're stronger than you know," it whispered, cold and ancient, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "The pain you feel is not weakness. It's transformation." Kaelen sat up, looking around the empty forest. "Who's there?" "I am you. The part of you that's been sleeping, sealed away, waiting for the moment when you be strong enough to contain me. I'm not strong. I'm dying. You're awakening." The voice grew clearer, more defined. The rejection was the key. The pain, the shattering of the bond. It broke the seal that's been keeping me dormant since you were born. Now I can finally emerge. Now you can finally become what you were always meant to be. "And what's that?" Kaelen asked, her voice bitter. "A broken Omega too weak even for a fated mate? You were never an Omega." The voice carried absolute certainty. "You're the Unbreakable Shadow Wolf, the prophecy made flesh, the darkness the moon goddess created to balance the light. And now that the seal is broken, Now that the pain has completed the ritual, you're mine. Kaelen felt something stir deep inside her. Not her normal wolf, the quiet, gentle creature she'd shifted into since puberty. This was something else. Something massive and cold and absolutely terrifying. The prophecy, she whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. Rhys rejected me because of the prophecy. He knew what I was, what I would become. He knew, and he chose to sacrifice you to save his kingdom. A noble choice, perhaps, but futile, because the prophecy cannot be stopped, only delayed. And now that I'm awake, now that the seal is broken, the shadow will rise whether the king wills it or not. I don't want to be a weapon. I don't want to destroy anything. What you want is irrelevant. The voice was not unkind, just absolutely certain. You are what you are. The question is, will you resist me and let the transformation tear you apart from the inside? Or will you embrace me, master me, become the queen you were always meant to be? Kaelen thought about Rhys, about the cold certainty in his eyes as he'd rejected her, about the calculated cruelty designed to break her completely. He'd known what she was, had known she was his mate, and he'd chosen his kingdom over her, chosen duty over love, chosen to break her rather than trust her. If I embrace you, she said slowly, if I let the transformation happen, will I become what he feared? Will I destroy his kingdom? That depends on what you choose to do with the power. The prophecy speaks of destruction, yes, but destruction can be transformation, tearing down what's broken to build something better. The shadow doesn't have to be the villain, Kaelen. It can be the force that changes everything. He'll try to stop me. Let him try. The voice carried dark amusement. By the time we're finished, even an Alpha King will kneel before the Unbreakable Shadow. The Guardian's revelation. Kaelen's transformation began that night, and it was agony. Not the quick, familiar pain of a normal shift, but something prolonged and devastating. Her bones didn't just break and reform. They shattered completely, dissolved, rebuilt themselves into new configurations. Her muscles tore and regrew denser, stronger. Her senses exploded to levels that made her previous heightened awareness seem like blindness. And through it all, the voice guided her, teaching her to endure, to master, to control what was happening instead of being consumed by it. She lost track of time. Days blended into weeks, marked only by the increasing intensity of the transformation. She couldn't eat normal food anymore. Her body rejected it, demanding something else, something she didn't understand, until the old woman appeared. Kaelen woke one morning to find someone sitting by her makeshift fire, an ancient female with silver hair and eyes that seen too much, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to a different era entirely. "You're dying," the old woman said without preamble. "The transformation is too much for a body that's still trying to be human. You need to fully surrender or fully resist. Staying in the middle will kill you." "Who are you?" Kaelen's voice was rough, barely recognizable. "I am the last guardian of the old ways, the keeper of prophecies and the witness to transformations." The old woman stirred the fire with a stick. "I've been waiting here for 23 years, knowing eventually you'd come, knowing the prophecy would drive you to these cursed woods." The prophecy. Kaelen felt bitterness rise in her throat. "The one that made my mate reject me. The one your mate thought he understood." The Guardian's expression was sympathetic. "Alpha King Rhys has been having nightmares about the Shadow Wolf since his coronation. He's seen visions of you destroying his kingdom, turning his people to stone, spreading darkness across the territories. He believed the only way to prevent it was to reject you before your true nature wakened. But he was wrong. He was incomplete in his understanding." The Guardian pulled out a scroll, ancient and yellowed. "The prophecy is real. You are the Shadow Wolf. And yes, you have the power to destroy kingdoms. But that was never the prophecy's true meaning. She unrolled the scroll, revealing text written in a language Kaelen didn't recognize. But somehow, looking at it, she understood. The shadow comes at the end of an age, when light has burned too bright and blinded those in power. She will tear down what cannot stand. She will transform what refuses to change. She will force evolution through destruction, and from the ashes of the old kingdom, a new order will rise, balanced, strong, unbreakable. The Guardian looked at Kaelen seriously. The prophecy doesn't speak of evil destruction. It speaks of necessary change. Your kingdom is stagnant, Kaelen, rigid with tradition, blinded by old ways of thinking. The Alpha King rules with wisdom, yes, but also with fear. Fear of change, fear of losing control. The Shadow Wolf exists to force that change, to break what's become brittle, to make room for evolution. Rhys thinks I'm a monster. He thinks you're a threat to his people. And, in a way, you are, but not in the way he fears. The Guardian touched Kaelen's hand gently. The rejection was both his greatest sacrifice and his greatest mistake. He chose to break your heart, to save his kingdom. But in doing so, he completed the very ritual he was trying to prevent. What ritual? The seal on your power required two things to break: reaching your 23rd year and experiencing soul-deep agony. The mate bond rejection provided that agony. Rhys thought he was preventing your awakening. Instead, he triggered it. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so tragic. Kaelen felt tears forming, not of sadness, but of furious understanding. He broke me for nothing. All that pain, all that cruelty, it was pointless. Not pointless. Necessary. The prophecy required it. The Guardian stood, preparing to leave. Now you have a choice, Kaelen Ashford. You can let the transformation complete, become the full Shadow Wolf, and return to face the man who rejected you. Or you can resist, die here in these woods, and let the prophecy unfold without you to guide it. If I resist, what happens? The shadow power doesn't disappear just because you refuse it. It finds another vessel, someone less prepared, less capable of controlling it. The destruction Rhys fears becomes certain instead of possible. And if I embrace it, then you become the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, stronger than the Alpha King himself. And you get to decide what kind of destruction you bring. The mindless devastation of pure chaos, or the calculated transformation of necessary evolution. The Guardian walked toward the fog, preparing to disappear. Choose wisely, Shadow Wolf. The kingdom's fate rests on whether you can master your power or let your power master you. She vanished into the mist, leaving Kaelen alone with the most important decision of her life. Part 4. The True Shift. The Shadow Wolf of Surrender. Kaelen spent 3 days thinking about the Guardian's words, about Rhys's rejection, about the prophecy and power and purpose. She thought about the pain, the soul-destroying agony of having her mate look at her with horror, of being publicly humiliated, of having her very existence deemed worthless. She thought about justice, about revenge, about making Rhys understand exactly what he'd thrown away. But most of all, she thought about power. Not power for its own sake, but power as a tool for change. The Guardian was right. The kingdom was stagnant, locked in traditions that no longer served, ruled by fear of anything different or new. Maybe the Shadow Wolf wasn't meant to destroy. Maybe it was meant to transform. On the 4th day, Kaelen stopped resisting. She let the transformation complete. The shift was unlike anything she'd experienced before. Where her normal wolf transformation had been quick and relatively painless, this was slow, deliberate, and overwhelming. She felt her consciousness expand, felt the power of the shadow filling every cell, felt herself becoming something beyond wolf, beyond human. beyond anything the kingdom had seen in 1,000 years. When the transformation completed, Kaelen opened her eyes and saw the world differently. Everything was sharper, clearer, rendered in shades of shadow and light that revealed truth beneath surface appearance. She could see the life force in every living thing, could sense the connections between all creatures, could feel the very fabric of reality responding to her presence. She looked down at her new form and felt a surge of dark satisfaction. The Shadow Wolf was massive, easily 3 times the size of a normal wolf. With fur so black, it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her eyes were ice blue, glowing with cold fire, and around her, shadows moved independently, responding to her will, forming patterns and shapes that defied natural law. She was beautiful. She was terrifying. She was exactly what the prophecy had promised. Now we are complete. The ancient voice said, no longer separate but part of her own thoughts. Now we are what we were always meant to be. Kaelen tested her new body, moving through the forest with fluid grace. The fog parted before her. The cursed trees seemed to bow, and the oppressive atmosphere that had dominated the borderland for centuries simply vanished. The Shadow Wolf didn't fear the curse. The Shadow Wolf was the curse, and the land recognized its master. She spent 3 months in the borderlands, mastering her new form, learning to control powers that could reshape reality itself. She learned to move in absolute silence, to create darkness that could blind or conceal, to sense emotions and intentions to the shadows cast by every living thing. And she planned, not mindless destruction, as Rhys had feared, but calculated transformation. She would return to the kingdom, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a queen demanding her rightful place. She would show Rhys exactly what he'd rejected, exactly what his sacrifice had created, and she would give him a choice: adapt to the new order she represented, or be swept away by the change he'd spent 3 years trying to prevent. The mastery of shadow. The Shadow Wolf's powers were vast and terrifying, but Kaelen learned to wield them with precision and control. She discovered she could manipulate shadows as if they were physical objects, creating barriers, forming weapons, even transported herself short distances by stepping from one shadow into another. The darkness responded to her like an extension of her own body. She learned that her presence affected other wolves in profound ways. Her aura carried such primal dominance that even alphas would instinctively submit when she fully manifested her power. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply the natural hierarchy asserting itself. The Shadow Wolf stood above all other wolves, a force of nature rather than just another predator. But the most terrifying power was her silence. When the Shadow Wolf moved, she made no sound. Not footsteps, not breathing, not even a rustle of disturbed air. She existed in perfect, absolute silence that was somehow more menacing than any growl or roar. That silence could spread, could force other wolves into involuntary quiet, could create zones where sound itself ceased to function. It was psychological warfare perfected. Kaelen practiced until her control was absolute, until she could shift between forms instantly, could manifest her full power or hide it completely, could kill with thought or heal with a touch. The shadow wasn't just destruction, it was balance, the necessary counterweight to light that had burned too bright for too long. As the 3-month mark approached, as winter settled over the borderlands, Kaelen made her final preparations. She created clothing from shadow itself, form-fitting black leather that moved with her, that enhanced rather than restricted her movements, that made her look every inch the dark queen she'd become. She fashioned a cloak from living darkness that writhed and shifted with her moods, and she prepared her mind for what was coming. She would face Rhys again. would look into the eyes of the man who'd rejected her and show him exactly what his sacrifice had wrought. But she wouldn't be the broken, weeping Omega he dismissed. She would be the unbreakable shadow, and even an Alpha King would have to acknowledge her power. The question was, would he still see her as a threat to be feared? Or would he finally understand that the Shadow Wolf wasn't his enemy? She was his evolution? On the first day of winter, exactly 3 months after the rejection, Kaelen left the borderlands and began her journey back to the capital. The prophecy was about to fulfill itself, and the kingdom would never be the same. Part 5. The unforeseen return to kingdom's decline. Rhys Blackwood's kingdom was falling apart. It had started slowly. Small challenges to his authority, whispers about his decision to reject his fated mate, questions about whether a king who couldn't claim his Luna was strong enough to rule. Then it had accelerated. Beta Joran Steelclaw, an ambitious wolf from a powerful family, had begun positioning himself as an alternative leader. He questioned every decision Rhys made, challenged him in council meetings, gathered supporters who believed the king had grown weak. A true alpha doesn't run from his fated mate. Joran had declared during the last council session. He claims her, protects her, uses the mate bond to strengthen his rule. But our king? He threw away the moon goddess's gift because of a prophecy that might not even be real. That's not strength. That's cowardice. Rhys had wanted to tear Joran's throat out for those words, but he couldn't because too many wolves agreed with them. The rejection had cost him political capital, had made him appear weak when he needed to appear strong. And then there were the nightmares. They'd gotten worse since the rejection. Every night, Rhys saw Kaelen's face as he'd broken her heart, heard her voice begging him not to do it, felt the bond shatter between them. He told himself it was necessary, that he'd save the kingdom by sacrificing his own happiness. But the guilt was eating him alive. "Marcus," he said quietly one evening, staring out the window toward the distant borderlands. "Have you heard anything? About her?" "No, my king." Marcus's voice was careful. "Beta Ashford says she's alive, that she's still in the borderlands. But he hasn't seen her in months. No one has." "Good." Rhys's voice lacked conviction. "The farther away she stays, the safer everyone is." "Joran is calling for a challenge duel," Marcus said, changing the subject. "He's claiming your rejection of your mate proves you're unfit to rule. Under pack law, he has a right to challenge for the throne. Then let him challenge." Rhys turned from the window, his eyes hard. "I'm still the strongest alpha in the kingdom. I'll prove it by breaking every bone in his arrogant body." The challenge was scheduled for the winter solstice, 1 week away. The longest night of the year, when the moon goddess's power was strongest, when the outcome of such duels was said to carry her blessing or curse. Rhys spent that week preparing, training, trying to focus on the upcoming fight instead of the hollow ache in his chest where the mate bond used to be. He didn't know that Kaelen was also preparing, and that she was far more dangerous than any challenge Joran could pose. The return. The challenge duel took place in the great arena, an outdoor amphitheater that could hold thousands of spectators. Every pack in the Northern Territories had sent representatives. This wasn't just a duel, it was a referendum on Rhys's right to rule. Joran stood in the center of the arena, already shifted to his wolf form, a massive brown wolf with amber eyes, powerful and confident. He'd been training for this moment his entire life, building strength and support, waiting for the perfect opportunity to challenge the throne. Rhys's rejection of his mate had given him that opportunity. Rhys descended to the arena floor in human form, radiating alpha power that made most wolves instinctively lower their gaze. "You want my throne, Joran? Then try to take it. But know that challenging an alpha king is not just a duel. It's a fight to the death. I'm aware." Joran's mental voice carried absolute confidence. "And I'm ready to rule what you're too weak to hold." The duel began with traditional formality, both combatants circling, looking for openings, demonstrating their power for the assembled witnesses. Rhys shifted mid-circle, his black wolf emerging with liquid grace, and the two alphas clashed with earth-shaking force. They were evenly matched, Joran slightly larger, Rhys slightly faster. The fight was brutal, bloody, drawing cheers and gasps from the crowd as first one and then the other gained advantage. And then, at the moment when Rhys had Joran pinned, about to deliver the killing blow, she arrived. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The shadows in the arena grew deeper, darker, moving independently of any light source. And a presence descended over the assembled wolves, primal, ancient, absolutely terrifying, that forced every single wolf in the arena to their knees. Not submission, not choice, pure, instinctive recognition of a power beyond anything they'd ever encountered. Kaelen walked into the arena through the main gates, and the world seemed to darken around her. She wore black leather that seemed woven from shadow itself, a cloak of living darkness that moved independently of any wind. Her eyes, once warm brown, now glowed ice blue, cold and ancient, and the aura radiating from her was so overwhelmingly dominant that even Rhys, the Alpha King, felt his wolf trying to bow. She didn't run, didn't hurry, simply walked with absolute confidence toward the center of the arena where two alphas had been fighting moments ago. Joran was the first to recover his voice. Who dares interrupt a challenge duel? Identify yourself, or... Kaelen turned her gaze on him, and whatever he'd been about to say died in his throat. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence said everything. I am beyond your authority, beyond your power, beyond your comprehension. Rhys shifted back to human form, his golden eyes locked on a woman who'd haunted his nightmares and his guilt for 3 months. Kaelen, that was my name, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When I was weak, when I was broken, when I was the mate you deemed unworthy. She moved closer, and with each step, the shadows in the arena grew deeper. But I'm not that frightened girl anymore, Your Majesty. Your rejection completed what it was meant to prevent. It broke the seal. It awakened the shadow. It created exactly what you feared most. She stopped 10 feet from him, and for the first time in 3 months, Rhys saw the full extent of what his sacrifice had wrought. This wasn't the quiet Beta's daughter, who'd looked at him with hope and heartbreak. This was something else entirely, something ancient and powerful and absolutely beyond his ability to control. The prophecy, he breathed, is already fulfilled, Kaelen confirmed. The moment you rejected me, the moment you shattered the bond to save your kingdom, you triggered the very transformation you were trying to prevent. Ironic, isn't it? Your noble sacrifice was a catalyst for your worst nightmare. Joran, still in wolf form, saw an opportunity. If this woman was a threat to Rhys, then she was an ally to his challenge. He lunged toward her, intending to position himself as her protector, to use her power against the king. Kaelen didn't even look at him. Part 6. The Shadow Dominance Acclaim. Joran's attack never landed. One moment he was mid-leap, powerful jaws open, ready to demonstrate his strength to this mysterious newcomer. The next moment, he was frozen mid-air, held suspended by shadows that had solidified around him like invisible chains. Kaelen turned her ice-blue gaze on him, and her voice carried absolute zero emotion. You presume to protect me? You, who couldn't even defeat a weakened king in single combat. You, whose ambition is so transparent it bores me. She made a small gesture, and Joran crashed to the ground, the shadows releasing him. He tried to stand, tried to shift back to human form to explain himself, but found he couldn't move, couldn't even speak. The Shadow Wolf's dominance had locked every voluntary muscle in his body. "Let me make something very clear," Kaelen said, addressing not just Jorn but the entire assembled arena. "I didn't return to this kingdom seeking protection, alliances, or sympathy. I returned to claim what should have been mine 3 months ago. What your coward of a king threw away because he was too afraid to face the consequences of his own fate." She turned back to Rhys, and for the first time he saw real emotion in those cold eyes, rage, betrayal, and underneath it all, the remnants of the love that could have been. "You broke me to save your kingdom, rejected your fated mate because a prophecy told you I was dangerous. Well, congratulations, your majesty. You succeeded. I am dangerous. More dangerous than you ever imagined. And now you get to live with the consequences of your choice." "Kaelen, Rhys started, but she held up a hand, and shadows wrapped around his throat, not choking but silencing. "No, you don't get to explain. You don't get to apologize. You don't get to make excuses about duty and sacrifice and doing what was necessary." Her voice cracked slightly, the first sign of vulnerability. "You looked at me, your fated mate, the one the moon goddess chose specifically for you, and you decided I wasn't worth the risk, that your kingdom was more important than my heart, my soul, my entire existence." The shadows released him, and he gasped for air. Around them, the assembled wolves watched in terrified silence. This wasn't just a display of power. This was a reckoning. "I should destroy you for that," Kaelen continued. "The prophecy says the Shadow Wolf brings ruin to kingdoms. I could do it. Right now, I could tear down your throne, scatter your packs, reduce this entire capital to ash and shadow. That's what you feared, isn't it? That's why you rejected me." "Yes," Rhys said hoarsely. "The prophecy showed me that future. You, destroying everything I built, everyone I've sworn to protect. I saw it every night for 3 years. I had to choose my mate or my kingdom. I chose my kingdom, and created the very future you were trying to prevent." Kaelen's smile was cold. "The prophecy was always going to be fulfilled, Rhys. The only question was whether I would be your partner in managing that change, or your enemy in executing it. You chose to make me your enemy." Jorn, finally released from the shadow paralysis, tried one more time. "If you want revenge on the king, I'll help you. Together we could—" "You misunderstand," Kaelen said, not even looking at him. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice. And you ambitious beta are in my way." She shifted. The Shadow Wolf emerged in all its terrible glory. Massive, obsidian black, with ice blue eyes that burned with cold fire. Shadows writhed around her like living creatures, and her aura of dominance expanded to fill the entire arena. Every wolf collapsed to their knees, unable to resist. Not just submission. This was biological, instinctive, the recognition that something higher on the food chain had appeared. Even Rhys felt his knees buckle, felt his wolf trying desperately to bow before this ultimate predator. Only centuries of alpha training kept him standing, and even that was a near thing. Jorn, in his brown wolf form, couldn't resist. He pressed his body flat to the ground, whimpering, every fiber of his being screaming that he was in the presence of something that could end him with a thought. The Shadow Wolf padded toward him, moving in that unnaturally silent way, and Jorn felt his bladder let go in pure, primal terror. Kaelen didn't kill him. That would have been too quick, too merciful. Instead, she placed one massive paw on his head, gently, almost mockingly, and pushed down, forcing his muzzle into the dirt, making him understand, on a level deeper than words, that he was nothing, that his ambitions, his challenges, his entire existence was insignificant before the Shadow Wolf's power. Then she turned away from him, dismissing him as thoroughly as if he'd ceased to exist. She moved toward Rhys, who stood alone in the center of the arena, the only wolf still standing, his golden eyes locked on hers. The Shadow Wolf circled him slowly, forcing him to turn to keep her in sight. She was evaluating him, judging him, deciding his fate with every measured step. Then she shifted back to human form, standing before him naked for a moment before shadows wrapped around her like clothing, forming the black leather and cloak she'd arrived in. "You're stronger than I expected," she said quietly, for his ears alone. "Still standing, still fighting the instinct to submit. That's impressive. Most alphas would have collapsed the moment I release my full presence." "I'm the Alpha King," Rhys said, his voice steady despite the fear she could smell on him. "I don't kneel easily." "But you will kneel," Kaelen said with certainty. "The question is whether you kneel as my enemy or my equal." Part 7. The confrontation, and Ari claimed the choice. The arena was frozen in tableau, thousands of wolves on their knees, unable to rise while the Shadow Wolf's dominance pressed down on them. In the center, Kaelen and Rhys stood facing each other, two sources of power in a silent battle of wills. "Why are you here?" Rhys asked quietly. "If you wanted revenge, you could have taken it. Kill me where I stood. Destroyed my kingdom. Why this demonstration?" "Because I wanted you to see," Kaelen said. "To understand what you created when you rejected me. I wanted you to feel the fear, to know with absolute certainty that I am beyond your power to control or contain. I wanted you to realize that your sacrifice was meaningless." "It wasn't meaningless. I saved." "You saved nothing." Her voice cracked like thunder. "The prophecy was always going to fulfill itself, Rhys. The Shadow Wolf was always going to emerge. The only variable was whether I would do it with you by my side, with your love and support helping me control it, or whether I'd do it alone, with nothing but rage and betrayal to guide me." She moved closer, and he could see unshed tears in those ice-blue eyes. "You chose wrong. You let fear make your decision instead of faith. And now you have to live with the consequences." "Then kill me." Rhys spread his arms, exposed his throat in the ultimate gesture of surrender. "If that's your justice, if that's what the Shadow Wolf demands, do it. End this. Fulfill the prophecy completely." Kaelen stared at him, and for a long moment, the entire arena held its breath. Then she laughed, a sound without humor, bitter and broken. "You still don't understand. The prophecy was never about killing you, Rhys. It was about changing you, about forcing the kingdom to evolve beyond its rigid traditions and ancient fears." She gestured to the assembled wolves, still on their knees. "Look at them, your people. They've been worshipping strength for so long they've forgotten wisdom. They've been following traditions so blindly they've stopped questioning whether those traditions still serve them. They've been fearing anything different so thoroughly that they exile their own Alpha Kings, mate, rather than accept that maybe the prophecy had a purpose." "What purpose?" Rhys asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "Balance," Kaelen said simply. "Your kingdom has been all light for too long. Order without chaos. Tradition without innovation. Strength without mercy. The Shadow Wolf exists to restore balance, to tear down what's become brittle and rebuild it stronger." She circled him again, her voice dropping. "I don't want to destroy your kingdom, Rhys. I want to transform it, make it something better than what it was. But I can't do that alone. And I refuse to do it under a king who sees me as a threat instead of a partner." Understanding dawned in Rhys's eyes. "You want me to abdicate?" No. Kaelen's smile was sharp. I want you to evolve. To become the king this kingdom actually needs instead of the one you think you should be. To accept that strength comes in many forms. And sometimes the most powerful thing a ruler can do is acknowledge their own limitations. She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could feel the cold emanating from her shadow aura. 3 months ago, you rejected me to save your kingdom. Today, I'm giving you a chance to save it again, but this time, not through sacrifice, through acceptance. What are you asking? Kneel. The word carried the weight of cosmic significance, not in defeat, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. Acknowledge that the Shadow Wolf is not your enemy, but your counterpart. Acknowledge that I am your equal, not your subordinate. Acknowledge that the prophecy was never about destruction, but about transformation. Rhys looked into her ice-blue eyes and saw the truth there. She wasn't asking him to give up his throne or his power. She was asking him to share it, to rule beside her as true equals, balancing light and shadow, tradition and change, order and chaos. But accepting that meant admitting he'd been wrong. Meant acknowledging that his noble sacrifice 3 months ago had been based on incomplete understanding and fear rather than wisdom. It meant kneeling before the woman he'd rejected. If I do this, he said slowly, if I accept you as my equal, acknowledge your power, what happens to the mate bond? It's shattered. That can't be undone. Can it? Kaelen's expression softened slightly. The Shadow Wolf exists outside normal rules, Rhys. I can do things other wolves can't, including reforge what was broken, if both parties consent. Hope flared in his chest, sharp, painful, unexpected. You would restore the bond? After everything I did? That depends on whether you kneel as a king performing a political calculation or as a man acknowledging his mistake. She touched his face gently, the first kind gesture she'd made since arriving. I don't want a mate who accepts me out of fear or duty. I want a mate who chooses me, truly chooses me, knowing exactly what I am and loving me anyway. Rhys felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. 3 months ago, he'd chosen his kingdom over his mate. Today, he had to choose whether to let fear continue guiding him, or to have faith in the woman the moon goddess had chosen for him. He thought about the nightmares that had plagued him, about the prophecy and its warnings of destruction, about the 3 months of guilt and emptiness where the mate bond used to be. And he realized Kaelen was right. The prophecy had never been about preventing the Shadow Wolf. It had been about accepting her, working with her, trusting that the moon goddess knew what she was doing when she created a force of transformation to balance his force of order. Rhys lowered himself to one knee. The arena gasped. An Alpha King kneeling before a rejected mate. It was unprecedented, revolutionary, and absolutely necessary. I, Rhys Blackwood, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, acknowledge my mistake, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the arena. I rejected my fated mate out of fear, believing I was protecting my kingdom. Instead, I created exactly what I feared most. I was wrong. He looked up at Kaelen, letting her see the genuine remorse in his eyes. I don't kneel out of fear or duty. I kneel because you were right. About everything. The kingdom needs transformation. I need to evolve. And I can't do either without you. He reached for her hand. I choose you, Kaelen Ashford, not as a political ally, not as a necessary evil, but as my mate, my equal, my partner in ruling and in life. I choose you knowing exactly what you are, the Shadow Wolf, the force of change, the balance to my light. I choose you because the moon goddess was right. You're not my destruction. You're my completion. Kaelen felt something crack inside her chest. The frozen armor she built around her heart to survive the rejection. Tears formed in her ice-blue eyes, the first genuine emotion she'd shown since arriving. "You hurt me," she said quietly. "Broke me in ways I didn't think I could survive. I spent 3 months learning to be strong without you, to embrace power instead of love. I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life making up for that. If you'll let me." She pulled him to his feet, and the moment they touched, something extraordinary happened. The shattered bond didn't just restore. It reformed into something new, something stronger. A bond that carried both alpha authority and shadow dominance, light magic and dark power, perfectly balanced and absolutely unbreakable. Kaelen gasped as the bond snapped into place, feeling Rhys's emotions flood through, his guilt, his love, his desperate hope that this second chance would be enough. And through their connection he felt hers, the pain she'd endured, the power she'd mastered, the love that had survived despite everything he'd done to destroy it. "The unbreakable shadow," he whispered, understanding the prophecy's final meaning. "Not just you. Us. Together. A bond that survived breaking and reformed stronger. That's what the prophecy was really about." "Yes," Kaelen said, her cold aura finally warming. The shadow and the light. The king and the queen. Ruling together. Balancing each other. Transforming the kingdom into something that honors both tradition and change. She turned to address the assembled arena, her voice carrying absolute authority. "The challenge is over. Jordan Steelclaw is stripped of his rank and exiled for attempting to usurp the throne through manipulation rather than honest strength. And I, Kaelen Ashford, Shadow Wolf and Unbreakable Luna, claim my rightful place as Queen of the Northern Territories." She looked at Rhys, not as a subordinate, not as a symbol, but as an equal partner in ruling this kingdom. "Anyone who disagrees is welcome to challenge us both." The silence that followed was absolute. No one would dare challenge the combined might of an Alpha King and the Shadow Wolf. Finally, Marcus stepped forward and knelt properly this time, not from forced dominance, but from genuine respect. "I acknowledge Kaelen Ashford as Luna and Queen. Long may she and King Rhys rule, together and equally." One by one, the other wolves followed suit, pledging loyalty not just to their king, but to their new Shadow Queen. Epilogue. The New Order 6 months later. The kingdom had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Kaelen stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the capital city below. Where there had once been rigid adherence to tradition, now there was room for innovation. Where there had been fear of anything different, now there was cautious acceptance. Where there had been stagnation, now there was growth. The Shadow Queen's reforms had been met with resistance at first, but her power and Rhys's support had made opposition futile. Wolves who practiced unusual magic, dark healers, shadow walkers, those who'd been outcast like Kaelen herself, were now welcomed and integrated into society. Laws that had stood unchanged for centuries were being reassessed, updated, made relevant to the modern kingdom. It wasn't perfect. Change never was. But it was necessary, and slowly, the kingdom was becoming something better than what it had been. Rhys emerged from the chambers behind her, wrapped in a robe, his hair still mussed from sleep. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned into his warmth, feeling the mate bond pulse with contentment. "Still having nightmares?" she asked quietly. "No." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Not since the bond reformed. I sleep peacefully now, knowing prophecy's true meaning. Knowing I have you beside me instead of alone in the darkness." "You almost lost that," Kaelen said, turning in his arms to face him. If you'd been less willing to evolve, less capable of admitting your mistake, then I would have deserved to lose you, Rhys interrupted, and the kingdom would have paid the price for my stubbornness. But I didn't lose you. We found our way back to each other, and we're stronger for it. He touched the mark on her throat, the lunar mark that had appeared when they completed the mate bond properly this time. It glowed with both silver and shadow, a visible symbol of their unique bond. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Forgiving me? Choosing to rule beside me instead of taking the throne for yourself? You're powerful enough. You could have." "I don't want to rule alone," Kaelen said firmly. "The Shadow Wolf exists to balance the light, not replace it. We need each other. Your wisdom and tradition tempering my chaos and change, my innovation and transformation preventing your order from becoming rigid. Together, we're what the kingdom needs." "The Unbreakable Shadow," Rhys said, pulling her closer. "That's what they're calling our bond. The mate connection that survived rejection and reformed stronger." "Let them call it what they want," Kaelen smiled. "I know what we are. We're proof that sometimes the most frightening prophecies are really just difficult truths waiting to be accepted. That destruction and transformation are two sides of the same coin. That love can survive even the cruelest rejection if both parties are willing to fight for it." Below them, the city continued its daily life. Wolves learning to live with change, accepting that different didn't mean dangerous, slowly becoming the balanced, strong, unbreakable kingdom the prophecy had always intended them to be. And in the royal chambers, the Alpha King and his Shadow Queen stood together, watching the dawn break over their transformed kingdom, knowing that they'd turned prophecy into promise, fear into strength, and rejection into the strongest bond the kingdom had ever seen. The end.
Crescent Moon, did Rhys deserve Kaelen's forgiveness, or should she have ruled alone? Thought Balloon, was his rejection truly noble sacrifice, or just cowardice dressed as duty? Crossed Swords, would you have made the same choice in his position, mate or kingdom? Fire, what would you have done if you were the Shadow Wolf? Revenge or transformation? Comment below with your thoughts. Thank you for watching. Purple Heart if you loved this story of rejection, power, and transformation. Like this video to help others find this epic romance. Subscribe for more full-length Werewolf audiobooks. Share your favorite moment in the comments.